morning from Toronto, good afternoon from Milano, and good afternoon from Cape Town, and welcome to another episode on Design to Connect. Today, we're going to be connecting with Kevin Kimwelle. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, and we can't wait to start this conversation with you all the way from Cape Town.
Thank you very much.
How are you, Kevin, today? How's everything?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. It's a Friday, it's been a busy week, but at the same time, honored to be with you guys and looking forward to this.
So thank you for joining us. Yeah, it's gonna finish the week. Before we dive into the conversation, I'm just gonna give a short introduction of who you are to our listeners. And then we can start with the questions. So Kevin, you are a community architect, researcher, and social innovator in sustainable development. Your architectural designs and professional experience span from Kenya to South Africa, with global collaborations in USA, Germany, and India. Your focus has led you into community development work in South Africa, where you're currently based in. And your research work merges the environmental aspect with the socioeconomic impact and applies a multidisciplinary approach to design while engaging several academic institutions around the world. A lot of your work emerges from the foundation of people-centered design approach to create social justice through activism, and is combined with business, environmental, and technical studies for a holistic approach. There are a lot of more to say about you, but I'm gonna finish by letting our audience know that you have been nominated and have won several architectural awards since 2017, and your work has been featured in Architectural Record magazine, Metropolis magazine, the Guardian UK, and many more. And you have been numerously featured on South Africa Broadcasting Television, as well as many other TV programs. If I have to talk about all of your achievements, I think I would need a couple of days, but I think I'm gonna stop here. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
So Kevin, as always, we love to start our conversation with our guests by asking them about their stories. So we would like to know, what brings you to where you are today? And do you think, if we go back in time 10 years ago, is this the image or the vision that you imagined yourself to be at? And if you can share with us some of the valuable lessons that you've learned from the different people and the exposures that of countries and cultures that you've been in, that'd be highly appreciated.
All right, so what's my story? I think my story, if I can summarize it, I think the shift in my career from what a mainstream architect to, or commercial architect to a social or community architect occurred when I did a backpacking trip from South Africa to Kenya. And it was a stupid day or a silly day amongst myself and a couple of my architecture friends. But anyway, I thought it was a brilliant idea to travel by road to Kenya from Cape Town, and that way we would see Africa. And I don't think I was quite really prepared for it, but I just went for it. Your heart goes in, and then you kind of drag the rest of your body through it, right? And I saw Africa in a new light, in a very different way. I enjoyed the trip. It was very explorative. And I think just the friendly nature of people. And just remember, in this day, the rule was no plane. So I would have to do all this by road. Anyway, a couple of buses up, I'm in Botswana, and then after that, through Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania. And as I saw Africa and interacted with people, and people being very friendly and generous, I thought, well, I would like to do this again, So that was in my architecture years, because I was really starting to understand, despite the great heart and despite the Africa or the nature of Africans. I mean, I really was understanding and seeing before me the discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots, the need in Africa, the generosity of people, how architecture changes. I'll give you an example. In a bus stop in Lusaka, for example, which is in Zambia, we ended up, because the bus crossing over from Botswana to Zambia was late, we ended up making camp at the bus stop, at the city center bus stop. And what was really, and why it remains very clear to me is, of course, we didn't want to leave because there's a buses. So I didn't want to find a place to sleep and then come back the next day and find the bus is gone. So I was really determined to catch this bus, and I noticed everybody was there. So we pitched camp there, and this bus stop suddenly moved from being a bus stop into like a hotel. You know, people were selling food, others were selling mattresses made out of reeds. You know, there was a change of towels, you know. So I'm just watching this thing transform. And here I was tired, but I started people watching, you know, and I realized this was a full-fledged hotel. It had shifted from a bus stop. People were cooking, others were eating, others were selling, and wow, anyway. And then somewhere at about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, I watched this gentleman who had clearly been sleeping in this bus stop maybe for the whole week. Maybe this was just his lodging. Very tired, very beat. And he went into the bathroom, and there was a key to the bathroom. You know, these bathrooms have all these old, small British washing basins. And in there, he changed, he transformed. He brushed his teeth, he combed his hair, he made himself ready for the next day. And even that overweight jacket changed, you know, he put up his tie, he had a white shirt, you know. And there was this guy who was brazen, ready to conquer another day. And that stuck with me. Like, despite the hardships and the circumstances, here was this guy determined to beat this day, you know. I mean, clearly I'd fought with his demons and everything that night, including fighting for space to sleep and all that, but he was ready, he was prepared. And what could have been probably maybe even a 10-minute ordeal for me, I just watched in amazement. And that's the story of Africa I got to see and stuck with me. And I can tell you story after story after story. I mean, the pregnant women we picked up, I did the same trip later on, I think 10 years later, and this time was a commercial architect or mainstream architect. I did the trip, and this time somewhere in Malawi or Zimbabwe, we picked up this lady, and she was pregnant, and she had a baby, a boy, and she was going to the clinic, and I was like, oh, come in, you know. So I'm giving a lift and ask her where the clinic is, and she's just around the corner. Now, around the corner in Africa is not around the corner. It means it's a couple of distance. I mean, an hour, maybe two later, we arrive, and I dropped her off, and I'm just thinking throughout the rest of the trip, wow, she's pregnant, she has a kid, and she's walking that distance. And I mean, I was very fortunate or blessed to be working for a great architectural company, then with a great boss. And, you know, we were doing practice in Port Elizabeth, but I was, inside me, I had this conflict of architecture as I was practicing it in mainstream circumstances, and just the need in rural, peri-urban spaces, people who cannot afford architects, you know. And I then decided to take the leap of faith, and it seemed like I would have to go a very long path or a long journey to get into community architecture. But I guess, as I said earlier, my heart just went through, jumped over the fence, and my body had to go through it. And I started gradually working more and more towards community architecture.
Oh.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. So you never actually, that was not the route that you initially just wanted to start with, right? Like that was something that just came based on your experience.
Yeah, it was my exodus, Damascus moment, as they call it. It was my Damascus moment, that moment when you actually look at what the architecture practicing versus the need of the communities. And these are huge, large communities, and you start wondering who designs for them, who is their architect, you know, and you start thinking a lot. At times you don't sleep because it bothers you, right? It starts eating on you, and you start thinking the things you could do. And at times it's a gentle voice that you can just ignore and, you know, continue. But I think in my case, I just wanted to do something about it, and fortunately, I was able to.
Wow, I love that.
I have been able to so far.
And that's why we're very happy to have this conversation with you. But it's unfortunate that I do need to step out, and I will leave you with good hands with 𝐸𝐸𝐸 for the end of this conversation. So it was a pleasure talking to you, Kevin, for such a short period of time. And I hope we can connect on future instances for sure.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah,
Ciao.
bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Design to Connect. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be right back.
Okay, so now, okay, we continue. So Kevin, diving a bit into, let's say, sustainability and the way that we see sustainability in the world of today, I wanted to ask you this question, because most of the times when we talk about sustainability, especially in our today's culture, we keep the buildings as we have been designing it, like for the past 20, 30 years, and we just add some technologies to it to call it green or sustainable. And like adding these technologies make the buildings or the designs not to become affordable or accessible to the most part of the society. And we call it sustainable, not taking into consideration the social sustainability of the building or the economic sustainability of the building. But in your work, you talk about low-tech and affordable sustainable solutions. I wanted to ask you, why do you think it is important to have such kind of approach when it comes to sustainability? And you think, how can we change this narrative when we talk about sustainability to have a more inclusive approach in it? I don't know if I was clear.
Yeah, I think the narrative or the approach of sustainability is one that's been hijacked by mainstream industry. And I'm talking about in the building industry, basically. And so that's part of the reason when you hear sustainability, people immediately think about solar panels and the gadgets, you know. And that's the one part. The second part is the green agenda itself is highly driven by the Western approach, which then uses the technology that they have to try and mitigate solutions, which are great, but maybe not applicable in our continent, in third world countries. And so that's the big challenge. I found very early in my research that despite there's a global acceptance of the urgency towards sustainability. So the what we agree on, the how is where the problem is. And a lot of times the how is comes from the Western voice or the build industry, who then hijack the agenda, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And what happens then is we don't speak about sustainability in the larger community, about the 80% of the world, third world, who cannot afford this technology or these gadgets or these applications, or whatever we want to call them. So there is a very big gap there. Yet I think it would be very hypocritical of us to actually speak to these communities about sustainability while they live sustainable lives themselves. And what do I mean by that? Let's talk about recycle, reuse, wherever the 3 R's are, If you drive through Africa, you do not need to tell anyone to recycle, reuse, because everything gets recycled to death. A bucket of paint gets used as a container for carrying maize, mealie meal gets used as a bucket, gets used as, by the time that container is let go, it's been stitched together. It's been, so that's what I mean. It's really hypocritical of us to try. There is already a recycling, reuse, or sustainable thinking a culture within third world countries, within Africa, simply from the fact that they're poor. They have to really calculate everything very carefully, and everything all resources are so scarce that sustainability is inherent. I think there's another layer of sustainability that we really need to rethink about. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you look at a lot of the local architecture or local designs, and I'm talking about now passive approaches, the use of mud and touch, and why are those buildings so cool in the middle of a blazing sun, alternative reuse of materials. And just remember, I'm not promoting that we now start rebuilding our cities in mud and touch and all that. I'm just saying there are lessons in there that we can pull out. And instead of having all our buildings air conditioned and just creating more carbon, and the energy footprint is just shocking. If you think about how much the air conditioning of these buildings is, I mean, I've seen some of the builds in this building. It's mind-blowing. Yet we could use a passive design approach where a building is able to actually breathe. It's able to release heat. It's able to thermoregulate itself. And that's kind of where that conversation could go towards in terms of the mainstream space, but stepping back into the rural and peri-urban or the marginalized communities. I think the architecture that I've been pushing for, especially in talking about social and community architecture, is one that really rethinks eliminating costs and making buildings much more affordable, looking at approaches like passive design, recycling, and reuse of building materials, be it conventional building materials or traditional building materials or natural building materials. In my case, I tend to promote a hybrid or a use of both. Simply because in the spaces I'm in, a lot of times, which are peri-urban or in the city, we have so much waste coming from the city itself anyway. So we can kind of reuse that. And I'm not saying we promote a form of inferior architecture to communities. I'm just saying there's quite a bit of material that we can reuse. And if we understand what the community can afford versus what is coming out of these recycling areas, and we really rethink and use our gifts as architects and designers, we can make these properties, we can make the properties of these buildings or the aesthetic parts of the building, I mean, we can make it look beautiful. It can give dignity to communities, and it can still function as an architectural space.
True. And I think, I mean, what was interesting in your work is that not only you use these recycling materials and you create beautiful buildings that then the user, I mean, it's inclusive to all users. Also in your process of designing, you have an inclusive approach in the sense that you actually bring the community to be a part of the part of building process. And you talk about like that this can create integration between parts of society that normally they would be segregated. So I wanted to ask you how you're using this recycling approach to create this integration between different parts of societies and like making the, let's say, environmental sustainability to lead to social and economic sustainability also.
Yeah, 𝐀𝐟𝐿, I'll actually step back to the inclusivity part just to expand on it a little bit more. I think if you get the appropriate technology, you understand the challenge and the context of that community well, and you start thinking as a community, not as an architect who's just stepping in and kind of dropping an alien spaceship there, you automatically start being more inclusive. And it takes time, and that's the one thing, unfortunately, money cannot buy time, right? What it means is you have to, you have to be in the community. You have to ask the hard questions and not, it's not a tick box exercise where you ask them, oh, do you have this? Do you need this? Because they will tell you what you want to hear because they have an agenda, They're thinking, oh, we might get X, Y, Z, depending on who the founder is, I think you being in the community, in my case, I use a methodology, asset-based community mapping processes. It's something I learned through development studies, where you actually map out the community and realize the first asset that community has is the people. What is their skill set? And then you get into the environment, what is around them, both environmentally, meaning both from an environment aspect of plants and life and etc., but also business. Are there business opportunities, economic opportunities, where people go to work, etc. So as you do that, you start building on layers of inclusivity. Eventually, even to, it could be a community in terms of a community social amenity that engages multiple people, the youth, the elderly, school, etc., etc., or even an individual meaning that because you've engaged with the community and their needs and their worries, and you then end up providing a very appropriate solution that the community can relate to, can be proud of, and it gives something special to the community. So that was just me kind of trying to build up on what inclusivity is, because then it's not just kind of bringing people together into a room and then, sorry, I'm going to forgive me for that. Let me just put phone on do not disturb. So the sorry, my thought ran away. So it's not just a process of basically bringing people in and saying we're having an inclusive process. Actually, it could be none of that. It could be you with a piece of paper, with a group of people, slowly walking through the streets and mapping the processes and asking the right questions and, really understanding who's who in the community. And I'm not talking either in terms of political or hierarchical structure, the talents and the gifts and aspirations and the dreams. And it goes much deeper. I say that because I've been in a space where I'm involved with municipalities and agencies and, NGOs and others who intend well for the community, but the process of really getting what applies or works fails because it's almost a tick box exercise, right? Yeah, and then of course, depending on the nature of project, then who do you call on the drawing board with you, right? Or on the drawing table, and that starts way early because you've done all these kind of mappings. So by the time you get to actually engaging the people in a more crucial manner or a more critical problem or more your surgical approach to a problem is already, your knives are quite sharp already. You have what it needs to do the operation.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think inclusivity also became like sustainability, a buzzword that we just, as you said, we just are trying to tick the boxes, but it takes time and it takes time to build. And it's not something, it's not a how-to kind of essay that you do this, and you suddenly become inclusive. It's just something that takes time and you need to put energy for it. So thank you so much for that. And you talk about connection between the, let's say, the architect figure and the rest of the community that we lost. And for me, it doesn't make sense that we are architects designing for the communities, but we don't, I mean, especially in the mainstream form of architecture, we don't connect with the community. I think another thing that we lost our connection with as architects or designers is the connection with the materials, right? So as we are becoming more reliant on computer skills and this and that software, we are using our manual or hand, let's say, we are missing how to work with our hands and how we actually connect to the materials, how things work in a real scale. And I know that all of your projects are very hands-on type of projects. And I wanted to ask you, how was that process for you, like moving from architecture education and then trying to do things more manually? And why do you think that it is important that we keep these connections with our hands and between the, let's say, mind and the body when it comes to architecture?
I think I've been relatively successful in this process because right at the very beginning, I realized I was a problem. Meaning the architect was a problem. And I had to unlearn architecture in terms of our attitude or mindset, our thinking, and which is very Western driven. It's a very curriculum kind of mainstream. You get into an industry and then you leave communities away. So I had to unlearn architecture, and I think understanding developmental approach and developmental theory and really understanding other layers of how to engage with communities really helped. The other thing is, I think because of architecture being such a complex profession, it then ends up stepping so far away from the very people it's meant to serve. So architecture becomes a mystery, which it became a mission for me to demystify it, because architecture is this profession that is, when you ask anybody, or most people except architects ourselves, right? About architecture, I think it's a very posh career, which I'm not saying it isn't, and it has this utopianness to it, whereas in reality it could be very different. It could actually do more, and it doesn't have to be so complex, especially in its various contexts. If you're designing, for example, to build the tallest building in the world, absolutely, that kind of complexity is required, and that's the beauty of architecture, that we can put our resources and our minds and our skill sets to execute such a marvel. Where we fail is because then we try to use that same skill set to build a simple structure in a community, and because we're arriving with all our know-how, but we've forgotten that the community also has a know-how, and we've forgotten that the community has assets, and the community has an environment and space, and they can actually contribute. So one of my missions is usually, when I get involved in projects, is a step back. I let the people speak, and if they're not speaking, and just remember, when you're engaging with the community, you have loud voices. The loud voices will be the natural leaders within those communities. Could be, the councillor, the political leadership, and yet some of the silent voices, the women, the children, the youth, don't have the opportunity, and because they are already kind of railed in the system, you then get to hear them, and you leave the room without asking about them. So I think, and this is almost an approach which is kind of economical driven. When you're asking these questions as an architect, mainstream architect, part of it is realizability, and you're asking the right people what to do and how to do, and of course it's the leadership. But at times, especially in the social context, then you have to invert that. How do you include more people? How do you get more voices? How do you hear the voices of the vulnerable? All the silent, quiet voices that don't say much in a room, but can actually ensure your project is successful. So that was the first part. Demystifying architecture is the first part, rather, demystifying architecture. So when I go into communities, I don't wear my architecture cape. I try to become as local as possible, engage with the community. And if they already know I'm an architect, some of them get very disappointed because they keep looking behind me to find where the architect is, because I don't look like an architect, so there's always like, okay, so where is, and you kind of are like, oh, the architecture is coming, it's coming, it's and what I'm getting to is really just blending in, understanding, being part of the community, because it requires that for you to really understand the challenges, that they're facing, and to really be able to put something together with them later on that is meaningful.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Now, I mean, moving a bit in a more general term and looking at the architecture industry, let's say, in a more holistic way, and from your experience, of course, what do you think are, I know there are a lot, but what do you think are some of the main challenges that architecture is facing nowadays? And what do you think we should focus on energy on? I mean, in your opinion, because I think sometimes there are a lot of issues and there are a lot of problems to solve that it can become in times, I don't know, overwhelming there are so many things to solve, and it puts so much pressure that you don't know where you can actually put your energies on, or you can do something. So what is, in your opinion, some of the main issues that we are facing as an industry?
I think one of the main issues is the challenge of actually the learning of architecture, so that it's much more inclusive in its approach to the client, because you have mainstream clients, or your corporate client, or your wealthy client who wants, a reasonably sizable project, but then you leave out large communities who will never be able to afford us as architects, simply because they cannot afford the professional fee, they cannot afford to employ us. So I think architecture, and it already actually is happening. I don't know if there is I've been watching this space for the last, I think, 10 years. Community and social architecture is actually rising to the occasion. We have more and more socially aware and more community-driven architects who are coming out and saying, actually, this is what we want to do. And I think part of what we're doing to kind of try to fix that problem or challenge is to promote a genre of architecture. And it's not new, again, it's always existed. But I think the big problem is the education of architecture, because we are trained to serve industry and not to serve and wealthy clients, and not to necessarily serve community. So that's the big problem. The first problem I think we need to solve. And to do that, it means then we have to relook the curriculum of architecture, introduce more newer modules, more applicable modules, especially in different contexts. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be studying about glass in Africa, but then where is the study of natural building materials? Why is it disappeared? Why is it not in the curriculum? And a lot of, and you'll see it even with very well talented architects, some of them struggle to engage with clients simply because it's almost like an art thing. You paid, you go produce this masterpiece, and then you present it, and then which doesn't serve the purpose when you're dealing with the community, because you have to understand the community, you have to serve the community. Let me put it this way, in the sense of, actually, I remember when I first went to university, and this is year one of university, and I'm listening to the head of the School of Architecture, which shall remain unnamed for now, talking about architects. And in my head, I was like, oh my goodness, architects are gods, looking down on this mortality of men, I was horrified. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm definitely gonna go to hell. We are, I'm exaggerating it, but you're getting
no, I get it.
Yeah, my point is just architects are like these demigods or gods, which is really, really does harm to the profession of architecture. It kind of pushes this idea of star architects, and and it takes away the purpose of architecture, especially in community. And Africa is a lot of the third world countries are highly social communities. They have a very strong social fiber, and then we have these very same architects coming to create these white elephants in our communities. And so I think that's the first challenge, actually creating more space for an old new genre of architecture, an architecture that is much more aware and sensitive, and that it requires a new skill set. It needs a new curriculum, new modules, better understanding of communities, etc., etc. And also the other part of it, and you asked about this question earlier on, is then it attaches itself a lot on the make approach. The make approach is basically, if you went to a community, rural community, people would come together and build the one house, and then the next house, and then the next house. So the community was building its own homes, And I mean, I'm not saying we should stay there, but what we can pull out of that is the make approach that there is an inherent ability in all humans to actually build. It's what separates us from other living organisms. It's what the way we do it is so much more advanced and sophisticated, And I think the make culture or the make ability, if tapped in very well, could actually start contributing back in a social economic manner to the communities that we work with.
You are listening to Design to Connect. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be right back.
So by understanding, I think the make approach, the good part, the really interesting part of it is it starts rebuilding our skill sets within community, or reinforcing them basically. And it's a low-lying fruit that we can use in building up literally communities, both physically and metaphorically, into better communities, and creating much more impact that could roll out into possible businesses and small scale micro enterprises, as we call them in South Africa, SMEs, etc. So but back to that genre of architecture, the idea of community architecture, so it needs to be a genre within architecture where we then start really that breed of architect is not your mainstream architect, can be, but is not. And their dedication, and if you think about it, then even the way they work with the community will differ. How they get paid will have to differ, right? Because these communities cannot afford them, right? And how, etc., etc. So we need to and I don't know how we will do it. I'm not giving. I'm not saying I have the solutions here, but I'm thinking that by promoting this genre of architecture and engaging academia, which is where architects learn to be architects, we will start fixing that problem better, because that breed of architect will think of materials very differently, will think of urban planning very differently, will think, they will not be thinking of urban planning coming from, this is the town plan in the city, and this is kind of the plot size and the services. No, they will be thinking about it in the context of a rural community where there is no town planning, where everybody is a town planner, and people negotiate everything on site, and how do you then make them all understand the challenges? And actually, being a mainstream architect gives you that advantage, because we know what the extreme nature of architecture should be, but these communities don't, So it's upon us to actually now take that mystery of why it's 3 meters as a buffer and really make it understandable to the community of service claims and things and servitudes, all these complex things. Communities can understand them if we explain it to them in a humane way, and they can understand the necessity of them, and can even get involved in creating better architecture.
Yeah, exactly. I think that could be also maybe the deeper or real meaning of inclusivity, like giving the community the dignity of being the same, instead of thinking that we are a sole leader, that we come from outside and they don't know anything and we have to do everything. Giving them, dignifying them to the point that they are a part of their community building. I think that could be another, how we explain inclusivity. And this kind of education, of course, it has to happen also in the developed countries, because there are so many issues with affordable housing and homelessness. Maybe it's not very community driven, or the lives are not very socially made, but there are still a lot of issues that need to be solved also, let's say, in the western part of the world. So of course the education has to change for sure.
So that's the one in education, and the others can follow. Europe, as you said, is already relatively doing well, where mainstream architects are sensitized a little bit more. And at times the sensitization means reining them in with rules, because that's what architects understand, or practice understands. It's always about rules. These are the rules. This is the red book. This is what the legislation says it is, and then working within that. So I think that works better many times with the profession, because the mold is made. It's too late for them, and they have to tick those boxes. They have to sign. It's the professional indemnity that is being put in the line, and they will not make compromises, because in the long run, it's their building. They're signing that document and it's going out, So it's much harder for them to think, community or person X. No, they have to. So, and that can be changed in the profession itself, reviewing itself through, in South Africa, we call it continuous development, CPD, continuous professional development, where the practice is continuously being developed to be more appropriate. And that space is also tricky, because if that space is hijacked by industry, which is many times what happens, the newest glass, the greenest glass, the newest technology, it showcases there, right? And then you just kind of keep the river flowing in a direction that we don't want it to.
Yeah, and sometimes because of the speed, the architecture industry became so fast-paced that we as humans can't also keep up and control everything and have it like in the most sustainable manner. It's just that we have to build and build and build. It became a business. So
it is, actually, Areze, you know what? We're always trying to catch up with the latest technology, the latest glass, the latest metal, the latest design of production, and and the one moment it's a German technology, then it's a Swiss technology, and then it's, it doesn't matter. What I'm getting to, if you're to learn all of them and apply all of them and still keep up with the profession, it's very difficult. So that cycle is very, it's overwhelming. And I think that's where actually the continuous development process of architects and being sensitized, be it through rules or through rigorous engagement, plus by getting involved in community. I must say at this stage, though, I have a lot of my former classmates or colleagues in architecture who admire what we as community and social architects do, and they are supporting it. They know that their profession, unfortunately or fortunately, is down that route, and there's nothing they can do. But if you call on them to show up, they will come. They will come to the events. They will come and support. They will bring their tools. They will some of them even sponsor projects. So it's not all gloom and doom, basically. I think also by sensitizing them, they start realizing, I'm in this rail. This is the system we work in. And because of this system, we make this kind of profits. What if we could take a percentage of that profit and put it then to those poor architects who cannot afford our kind of, and we support that. So that in itself, and a lot of them do, by the way. I say that because I'm seeing more and more architecture firms getting involved in projects that they are giving, which is great.
Yeah. It gives some hope for the future.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna just ask the last question just to because of the time to wrap up. Of course, I don't want to wrap up, but we have to. Just this question is a little bit more on a personal level, and it comes from my own curiosity. Let's say, I wanted to ask you about the design of the school, and tell me if I say the name wrong. 𝐶𝐶𝐿𝐼𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐼 𝐶𝐶𝐿𝐼𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐼. Is it correct? Okay.
𝐶𝐶𝐿𝐼.
Okay. You think what were the elements that made the design of this school the success that it became? Because I feel, I don't know, also when I was working in mainstream architecture, there are so many times that when you are doing the studio work and you're so tired and frustrated, you feel that you put some hatred or frustration into a building. But I feel it's very clear when a project is well loved and it's done with, you do it out of pure love in versus to a project that is done, just wanting to finish everything and it's coming out of frustration. So I wanted to ask you, as a curious person, what were the elements that made your school design look as a well-loved project? Because I feel it's very beautiful, and I wanted to ask you, was it because of your connection with the community there? Was it coming from your last experiences? What was that thing that, basically? I think
it was a combination of things. Inclusivity. For example, those wine bottles were collected from several restaurants, and we had to call in a lot of restaurants to donate. So the restaurants are fast business, and telling them to put aside bottles and telling them this exact bottle is already a mission, and for them to be willing to do it, So it was inclusivity right from inside the community and outside the community. Businesses coming on board and saying, okay, we'll donate this. We have some material here, you can use this material. I actually had an architecture firm call and say, hey, we're pulling down a building X over there, and there's roof sheets and there's toilets, grab them. And I think because a lot of people were involved in it, that made it successful. That's one layer. Second of the marriage of the understanding and marriage of the problem, which, let's put it this way, the groundwork into actually realizing the work was also successful in us understanding this is what the need of the community is, but that's what they want. This is what the need of the community is, but this is what the funder wants. And being able to pull it around and kind of put it together so that the funder, in this case, who provided the seed fund, because they needed to tick the boxes, right? And the community who needed something to hold on to, So it was a lot of groundwork in trying to negotiate all of those, put them together, get people involved in it so that they can participate in whichever, and really keeping it open. Some restaurants even went as far as sponsoring events that were participatory in the community, and we didn't tell them to. They just said, "Oh, that project, all right, we'll come and we see there's a lot of kids. We'll offer a small, what do you call it, a doggy bag or whatever to, I think that is actually what made it successful, and it was a lot of groundwork. And eventually the manifestation of us understanding the challenge of the need, the materials that were available in the community, which was pallets. And really then, I think as architects, we're able to accelerate the process of material understanding in a laboratory that we can do easily, So calling on people, calling on the university in this case, and that part we could fast track. But part of really understanding the community and getting the city involved, that took time. I mean, that project took almost a year plus to just get it on site. In terms of really digging in and getting people involved. We even got international volunteers on board, universities, and yeah, that was the success of it.
Yeah.
I love the image of the owner of the creche, because the creche, the building was used in multiple ways, a creche, a community center, etc., but you see her and then the one bottle wall behind, and you can see she's dressed in this outfit, which blends in with the bottles, which are pixelated, which is kind of very, I think, symbolic, that the architecture is so appropriate. You almost feel it naturally coming into being.
Yeah, it's a beautiful project. I can't get enough of looking at it. It's very beautiful. It's very beautiful, and congratulations. So thank you so much, Kevin, for giving us your time. And if there is any last words that you want to share with us, and if you'd like to share with the audience where they can follow your work, in which let's say social media platforms can they check you out, and any last words if you would like to share.
I think my last words is we all have a role in humanity. In this case, we were talking mainly about architecture, but in all professions, be it in medicine, be it in engineering, and we are waking up. We are waking up to it more and more. Again, it's a global phenomenon. We are realizing that we are beyond our professions, not just doctors and engineers and farmers. And there's a huge human heart in us that calls itself to serve and help others. And I think we need to be more, the word is not intuitive, we need to hear that voice. And it's obstructed. It's obstructed by many things.
Yeah.
It's bombarded with other things that at times.
Lots of loud noises around.
A lot of loud noises obstruct us from hearing about it. Regarding my work, I tend to keep it out of the media just because I'm trying to keep a low profile. But we are in the process of building a website and all. Simply because a lot of it was R&D, research, development, and innovation. And I wanted at least the work to stand for a year or two before I said, which is what many architects do, yeah? You build a community tomorrow, you're already kind of showcasing it while it's still new. I hated it, I needed the communities or the people to be in there for a couple of months, years, then you can showcase it, because you also show where it fails, because it does fail. It's not all glossy and it fails. Sure. You need to go back and fix. But I think you can, if you Google my name, let me put it that way, you'll find me. I'm easy to find.
A lot of articles. Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. Really, I can't wait to come visit you one day in South Africa. And good luck with your work. And thank you for everything that you're doing. We
have space for you, Arzu. Whenever you want to come to the game, come.
I'm planning. I'm planning for next year, for sure. Thank you again. Thank you, Kevin. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye. Bye-bye.